IQSC coordinator, Dr. Vinita Tuli, uh, teacher in charge of economics department, Ms. Richa Suri, uh, other colleagues, and my dear students. I welcome Dr. Parnali Bhandari in this webinar, uh, and I'm grateful to her that she has given her valuable time for delivering a good lecture for our students, for our teachers. And I was just listening the topic of the webinar. It is very interesting that you are going to discuss about one step ahead in the uncertainty of 2022. And I hope that this lecture is going to be very interesting because Dr. Barnali Bhandari will definitely uh, uh, enlighten us with some certain things in this kind of uncertainty. That what kind of things are certain in this time of uncertainty, in this time of pandemic. So, and I'm glad that economics department, economics association and seminar is organizing such kind of webinars and workshops for the benefit of students regularly. So great going, Dr. Negi. You continue with your efforts. So thank you so much for inviting me. My best wishes to all of you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your encouragement words and your support always, which lead us to do all kind of activities. Thank you very much, sir. So, as we all know that since the outbreak of COVID-19, that the uncertainty is going on all over the world. The certainty is that the only uncertainty we have. So, keeping in mind all these, we know that how Indian economy has reacted after the outbreak of COVID-19. Not only the Indian economy, all across the world is facing a kind of slowdown. In fact, in the initial stage of COVID-19 outbreak, India's growth was much severe. The slowdown was much severe as compared to other developing economy, because maybe the cause was kind of, the slowdown which we faced was quite before the outbreak of COVID-19 because of the demand side disruption that was arised due to the demonetization and the way that the GST was implemented. This is what well documented that the fact is that in case of Indian economy, that the slowdown was quite started much before the COVID-19, and COVID-19 through its disruption towards the supply has aggravated the slowdown of the Indian economic growth, and resulting we faced in the first phase of COVID-19 that the severe slowdown in economy that was near about 7% and much higher as compared to developing economy. And then we have seen that over the time, because of the government initiatives and government schemes towards the growth and towards the addressing the issue we have in during the COVID-19, that Indian economy started coming back to high growth. Now, a standard debate is going on that whether this high growth rate, as we have seen recently, the IMF came up with a projection that Indian economy is going to be increased by, the Indian economic growth rate would be near about 8 or 8.5% by 2022. So a standard debate among the economists are going on that whether this would be sustainable, because if you see most of the initiative which is taken by the government is towards the supply side initiative. What would be happen to that demand side? Because if we will not have a balanced initiative, then the cycle of growth would not be complete. So we must have, most of the economists argued that the government is not focusing much more towards the demand side. So in future, that maybe in the short run we will have high growth rate, but in future it may not sustain. This kind of the debate is going on, and keeping in mind the risk which we have in case of inflation, unemployment, and all that, whether this high growth rate would be sustainable in future or not. So, as an economist, we have to see what the economic, the factor that is affecting the growth is in which direction this is going on. Because uncertainty is there. We do not know what kind of variant will be there, and then when the disruption of demand as well as supply will be there in the future. So one thing is clear that what kind of the policy, the initiative taken by the government that would shape the future of the country in terms of economic growth. So to understand all that, the what certainty amidst uncertainty during this COVID-19 and all that, to understand all these, today we will have the speaker, Dr. Bernali Bandari. Maybe she will be able to answer all that uncertainty in the economy, because she is so much engaged in the research and all that, and she is the institution where she belongs. They used to give the input to the government constantly. So we expect something good from the today's speaker. And I really thanks to ma'am, because being busy with many projects and many meetings and all that, she consent to be speaker of the talk. I really thanks to Bernali ma'am. And now I would like to invite Dr. Saraswati ma'am to present a brief introduction of today's speaker. Saraswati ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, all of you. I, Dr. Saraswati, welcome to all on behalf of Economics Department of ARSD College. It's my extreme pleasure to introduce our esteemed speaker of today, Dr. Bernali Bandari. She is going to speak on a very crucial topic, a step into an uncertain 2022. This is the subject in which we should all be deeply interested, because this unprecedented situation affects directly, indirectly, everybody's life. I warmly welcome Dr. Bernali Bandari. Dr. Bandari did her MA in Applied Economics from Eastern Michigan University, Ypsilanti. She received her PhD in Economics from University of Oregon, Eugene. She also worked as an assistant professor in economics, Fitchburg State College, Fitchburg. Currently, she is working as a senior fellow at NCAER, New Delhi, with a background in international economics, macroeconomics, specifically focusing on the impact of globalization and development. And currently, she is engaged in a number of industry studies, including automobiles, farm mechanization, and technology. She is also a part of the macro group of NCAER. Her wider research interests, including analysis, skilling from triple E perspective in education, employability, and employment, e-governance, infrastructure, particularly in the road and ITC sector. T20 issues like climate change, financing, and reserve currency, FDI, and trade-related issues. We are very glad we are very glad, ma'am, to have you with us. Thanks for giving us your valuable time for this valuable talk. I'm sure this talk will be enlighten our student and our faculty member as well. Thank you so much. Welcome you, ma'am. Mike is over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very honored, Dr. Jha, Dr. Negi, and Dr. Saraswati, and all other faculty and students. Thank you so much. What's not in my CV is I'm also an alumni of Delhi University. And so it is wonderful to, actually, I did my bachelor's from Deshbandhu College. And so it is very, very nice to come back to a university and give a lecture. I feel very honored. And not only that, it is, I wish we had these kind of facilities or exposure that the students have now. So I think it's so wonderful to have that you have these regular webinars. So it is a really good initiative, and congratulations to the principal, Dr. Jha, and congratulations to the economics department for doing this. It is a wonderful thing. And also in my previous incarnation, I used to be a faculty in the US, and I know I appreciate, this, how much students appreciate when you do this kind of effort to bring in outside faculty, to bring a live wire experience of what you're dealing with, to bridge the gap between academics and theory and practical. So again, congratulations very much to the university, to the college, and to the department specifically in your effort and initiative. And I really wish you that you continue this effort on this. So without further ado, I don't have any particular insights more than you have. You're all students of economics. Then what does 2022 hold us? It's like a crystal ball, and anybody's guess what 2022 will this thing. We were almost certain by 2021, by November, that we are going to sail through 2021 with 9.5% growth, and 2022 it was a matter of debate whether we're going to reach 7.5% or higher. Anything lower was not even considered. And then comes Omicron and changes the way we were thinking about it. So I just want to take you through a small journey of a PPT. I'm going to use our PPT to present some of my thoughts of where we were. It is, as Dr. Negi pointed out, it was very important to see where we were. What does high growth actually translate for us? And what do we see in the future? And even in the future, what do these growth numbers mean? And what are the policy challenges for us as we go forward? So give me a minute and I will share my PPT with you. I hope all of you can see this.
Yes, we can.
Yes. Again, thank you. So again, thank you for inviting me and letting me speak. These are really my thoughts and not my institution. So the views are completely personal here. So as we go through the numbers, I think the first and the most important thing always to look at is I want to keep, by the way, I want to keep it short so that we can actually discuss more rather than me just doing a one-way talking. So the first thing is, what does COVID mean for us, and what does this third wave mean for us? So as very clearly seen, we have had 3 waves in the country. This is nationally, of course, there might be international, local numbers may differ, timings may differ. But it started all in March 2020 when there was a national lockdown, and then the impact of that as we see it over the last 2 years. It has come, it's not just about the health cost, it has come at a huge human cost in terms of, we saw the migration, we've seen the labor markets not functioning. I mean, I can speak with this a different topic altogether. And of course, at the economic cost. So it's a tsunami of all crises that has come together. And of course, as the fact that I'm giving a talk, a webinar, the outreach is a reach, but it also means that the digital divide is a challenge in a country like India, where education is not reaching. There are many students who are left out of education. There have been health costs. Studies have been done to show that people have missed out on regular health care. So there are challenges are abound. But at this point, is what we see is that second wave was, of course, very deadly last year between April to June. The first quarter, much deadly in the first year. We almost at 4 times the number of deaths. The third wave, what we see is the Omicron wave. Is the number of cases have increased very rapidly. However, the number of deaths have stayed relatively low. This is all comparable, relatively low. But nonetheless, the third COVID wave is going to put dampener on economic recovery. So while you may recover still, and you may still see positive growth, but it definitely will be lower than what it was because of accompanying restrictions locally. So this is where the COVID situation is. We still have not peaked yet. So it depends how much we go up. The deaths, number of deaths are now slowly going up. But if we go by other countries' evidence, it should not, we should still sail through. It should be better than the second wave. But economies are already thinking of unrestricting. At least in Delhi, I think the chief minister tried and the lieutenant governor said no. So we still are under weekend curfew. So we are going to sail through, but it will be some time before it becomes endemic. But the second wave was more deadly, but in terms of economic cost, the first wave was economically more costly. So altogether, it's been a rough 2 years, and we are going to see the imprint of this for the next 10 years, if not more, as we go forward. And so the next thing is so I'm going to present you a very macro picture here. The idea is, what's some key story that I want to tell you? The key story I want to tell you is, yes, we were in a slowdown even before the pandemic. The pandemic, the numbers show that, yes, we recovered. 2021 was, of course, rough, and 2012 we contracted. 21, 22, there is recovery. So far, that is what it seems. But what does that mean? The massive slowdown and the recovery itself. What do these growth estimates mean? Zilch, because the basic story that comes down to is that at the end of 21, 22, we will just be at the level of GDP that we were 2 years earlier. So these are the lost 2 years of growth. And it's not even sure now, because of the Omicron, that whether we are going to reach that 1920 or not, if at all. So what we see is this picture here. The red numbers are annual numbers, green are quarterly numbers. As you can see that we had started slowing down in 16, 17, and in 2021, mainly because of COVID and its associated national lockdown, stringent lockdown, we saw a contraction of 7.3%. And now the first advanced estimates, these are estimates, project that GDP in 21-22 is going to be around 9.2%. This thing. But remember, this information, this projection is based on the first 6 months of data. That may change. At the end of January, we will see the second advanced estimates, and we'll see what, as they take in the information from till December, what do those estimates tell us? Then even the quarterly data shows basically the same story, that we were contracting since 17-18 Q2, and the GDP fell till in the first quarter we contracted by 24.4%, and so on and so forth. So we have seen this 2021-22 growth rate that we see in the first quarter, 20%, and followed by 8.4%. And these mean essentially these are the base effects rather than actual growth, that you actually recovered from what you were last year. So it is comparing year-on-year growth rate, means what you were last year compared to this year. Remember, last year you contracted, so this year obviously you will see very high level of growth. But the question is, did we catch up? Let's see in level form. So it's in what has happened to the data, and this is something I also learned as we went around. It was easy to just look at the growth rates and be glamorized by it. But what we started doing is cutting the data in many ways. So it was not just because of these very high growth rates, which actually mean nothing. So 20% growth rate means nothing, because you have to then see it in level form. And when you see it in level form, that is, you actually see in rupees lakh crore or rupees million, lakh crore rupees trillion, what we see is that, and this is the first half, this is not the second half, this is the first half of the year. That means April to September, April, May, June, July, August, September. We have followed the financially fiscal year, so April to September. What we see is a gross value added. We still, at the end of the September, we were still short of, we were at 66 lakh crore in 1920, but in 21-22, we were still at 63. So we were still short of 3 lakh crore at the end of the first half. Similarly, GDP was still short of what we were in the end of the first half. So 2 years even after 2 years, we have not, even despite such double-digit growth rates, it boils down to we still hadn't caught up with what we were 2 years ago. That's basically the punchline here. The key message is we still hadn't caught up in, say, September. But of course, that means is we were going, but the advanced estimates suggest that we are going to catch up. That's so what the estimates are saying. In 1920, we were at rupees 133 lakh crore. In 21-22, by the end of March, we would be, the GDP, GVA would be 135 lakh crore, and so would be the GDP, 146 or 148. Now, the main question is, the first uncertain question is, will we catch up? Now, given that third quarter, of course, you will see positive growth, but the fourth quarter, will we actually catch up, or will we actually be? We will still see positive growth, but will we actually catch up to this or surpass this 1920 levels, or will we just be slightly below because of the Omicron effect? So that's our first level of uncertainty. The second, then we look at is, and that's basically the question is, and then what does 21-22 hold for us? So not only our fourth quarter projections are affected, but 22-23 is also affected. Then it's not just enough to look at aggregated. So what we do is a little bit of deep diving into each sector. And here we look at that, again, agriculture sector had very high growth rates in 16, 17, 18. Since then, we have had lower growth rates. But it was only it was the only sector which showed positive growth rate, or one of the few sectors which showed positive growth rate in 2021. And it is projected to grow at a slightly higher growth at 3.9%. And even in the first half, it performed relatively well. So, and it's going to be surpassed. What this is telling you, the first half, we had surpassed in 2 years. We had surpassed what we were doing 2 years ago. Essentially, we were producing 1920. We were doing 8.3 lakh, and 21-22 we had 8.9 lakh crore. So we had basically surpassed what we were doing 2 years ago. And even in annual data, we are projected to surpass the estimates. Given that we had a very good some monsoon season, and despite and even Rabi season is quite well, reservoirs are full. So what we estimate is that for the rest of the year also we will do quite well. Again, unless there's any nasty surprises, but we estimate that even the fourth quarter will go quite well for us. The agriculture sector is quite robust, is very much dependent on rainfall, since only 40% of our land is irrigated. And the rainfall has been robust this year, so we expect to do well in the agriculture sector. And by the way, the government is also handing out a lot of fertilizer subsidy. The second is industry. Now, when I look at industry, what I look at industry is I add up there are 4 sectors within industry. There's mining, there's manufacturing, there's electric, gas, and water utilities, and fourth is construction. So these are the 4 subsectors within what we call it the industry growth rate. And here again, as you can see that industry growth rate was also quite slow even before the pre-pandemic. It was slowing down since 15-16. And even in 1920, it was very slow, or it contracted in 2021, but then it is projected to grow at 11.8%. You should not look at these growth rates and estimates numbers, because again, these are what I termed as base effects, because you fell so hard in the first year, 35.8%. So the growth is naturally going to be much larger. So what we see is that again, in the first half, we had almost caught up. We were a little lower. And the reason we were slightly a little lower is what we find is that the mining and electricity, gas, and water utilities had actually caught up with 1920 levels. But we find that manufacturing and construction sectors, which are actually the largest sectors in the industry, they had yet to catch up with 21-22. But the industry sector was always going to do well. these are the annual numbers. So just I'll take a break here from the numbers and just tell you that in 2021, when we were doing the forecasting exercise, and we knew that COVID is coming in. An excellent book, if you have ever time to read it. There's a book. It's called Baldwin. It's published by CPR. It's an online book, so it's completely free. So in that point of time, this is the March 2020, the authors are making a forecast saying that it was always that the manufacturing sector would make a comeback, because that time it was the thought was that COVID is very spread by using, if you come in close contact with anybody. So it could be through surfaces. So contact incentive. So it was always there that the industry sector, what would happen is that the industry sector, the manufacturing sector specifically, is that there might be a lockdown, there might be a fall dent in consumption, but what will happen is that after when you open up, the pent up demand, what you call is because you haven't consumed for a while, you will try and make up for a lot of these goods, consumption of goods, and therefore the manufacturing sector will catch up quite quickly. And this intuition played out quite well. As you can see, industry sector has done a pretty good job of catching up with what we have lost in the last 1 year. Now the question really is, the question really is that yes, we will catch up with 1920, but we were already in a slowdown even prior to 1920. So will we actually go beyond 1920 and will we grow further is the second piece of uncertainty. More or less what we see is that economic activity has continued, especially the industry sector has continued to function. There has not been that many restrictions this time, though there have been some moving to work from home. We know that when you move from work to home, it's very hard to have a manufacturing sector produce. So that's when they get affected. But the services sector, in contrast, continues to function to a certain extent anyway. So, but what we find is the manufacturing sector also, what we call is a V-shaped recovery. So the manufacturing sector recovers quite fast and is able to make up. But the challenge is, will it make up from the 1920 levels? Then when we look at industry, and here I just want to say that in services, now services, there are three major sectors. There's the hotels, restaurants, so on and so forth sectors. There's the finance sector, and then there is a public administration and defense sector. This I don't know if national income accounts is still taught, but from national income accounts, you will know that these are the subsectors within the services sector. Now, as I said, where this Alex Baldwin book was prescient enough to say that, because it's a contact intensive disease, at least at that point of time, you will find that services sector, there will be some lost output in the services sector. Services sector will find harder to recover. Partly is that, think like this, that if you're going out to, you're going out to a restaurant to eat, it's not that suddenly when then things become normal, you will go out again to eat. You'll go out twice to eat to make up for what you didn't eat before. It's not, but so you will continue to go out once. It's people like us who work. We could not take leaves, say last year, but it's not that my office will allow me to take more leave just because I didn't take leave last year. So so that means there is some permanent loss in output this year. Permanent loss in output that is associated with COVID. And we know this happened. So when Dr. Negi actually rightly pointed out that it was a supply shock, it was actually both a supply shock and a demand shock. Because when the COVID hit us, we went into lockdown in March, what we find is that immediately we stopped consuming, right? We stopped eating, we stopped taking the bus, we stopped eating out, we stopped consuming goods and services, because a lot of people decided to walk back because they didn't have rent to pay. So all those demand activities, what we call as demand, private final consumption expenditure, all that actually were constrained. So it was both a demand shock and a supply shock, and of course supply. Now, what do you mean by a supply shock? What happens is that what we find is that suddenly intermediate inputs are not available. So think like your factors of production are labor, land, capital. While land was of course available in factories, but labor could not come to your office. That means, and they decided to go back home, and because of the uncertainty associated with that, they could not make it back also. So labor, it's only after the second wave when people felt confident that they slowly returned back. So labor went missing. Then the fact of logistics was a challenge. What we mean by logistics, you're not able to transport your goods and services. Not only transport your final goods and services, but also transport your intermediate inputs. What we actually find in the data is that to compensate for that, there's a lot of what firms started doing is to overcome those challenges. They started they started adopting e-commerce. E-commerce, there was a lot of increase in B2B e-commerce, business to business. That is, firms are using this to buy goods and services, buy intermediate inputs, and firms are also adopting e-commerce to sell goods and services. To overcome the demand and supply challenges, they are doing both. So and of course, firms had to survive, right? I mean, firms can do only from the firm's perspective, they can only do. I do a lot of research on firms. That's why I'm bringing that into debate, into discussion. But firms do a lot of firms have to. Basically, you had to survive. How do you survive? Either you adapt, or you borrow to survive, or you exit. So these are the 2-3 strategies open. So we know a lot of firms actually exited permanently. It's not in some of my colleagues have done research where they show that the surveys, they will show that mom and pop stores have permanently closed down. So there has been some permanent closures too. So these are the permanent loss in output. So there has been both supply and demand shocks, not only locally, but we also hear internationally. So sorry for this long debate on this thing using the numbers, but essentially what I want to emphasize to you that while in the differences between manufacturing and services is very important. The nature of the services are different. So while industry could have a V-shaped recovery and quickly make a comeback, the one who could foresee that services sector would take a longer time to come back. And every time there's a wave, especially the second and third wave, immediately the contact intensive sectors, what you call is the restaurants, hotels and restaurants actually hire a lot of as one of the highest employers after say construction, agriculture sectors. They absorb a lot of the informal workforce. They were the ones who were most affected. And so what we find, a lot of restaurants, if you just go around, you will find that they have closed down. So services was always going to be difficult for services to make a comeback. But you have to think through subsectors. So while hotels and restaurants would suffer, we find that financial sector would continue to thrive because banks would remain open. A lot of digital channels came in, but education, of course, suffered, and regular health services also suffered. These are the 4 big areas. The telecom sector would, of course, benefit. IT sector would benefit. So IT sector has benefited from COVID in contrast to other sectors. So what we find is, yes, in the first half, again, in 21-22, we don't make a comeback. So yes, has been slower to recover. And not only that, even in the advanced estimates, which is suggested that the services sector will not come back to what it was in 1920. Overall, we would make up, but within the subsectors, while agriculture would continue to grow, manufacturing and services, industry and services, industries would make a comeback, but services wouldn't. We still might end up where we were in 1920, 2 years ago. Sorry, I think I'm going in reverse. But this is on the supply side. GVA is there are 3 major sectors in the economy: agriculture, industry, services, and I gave you this very in detail. Then there is the on the expenditure side. This is your C plus I plus G plus X minus M: consumption plus investment plus government expenditure plus exports minus imports. It's 4 or 9. I will keep it short. So when we look at the expenditure side, here again, expenditure is 58% of our GDP. It is the key sector on the expenditure side is a key sector. And again, the emphasis here is that the key message is that you are not going to make up to what we were in 1920. And what does the Omicron do to us? The Omicron essentially erodes our consumer sentiments, as the RBI Consumer Confidence Index will tell you. We just haven't gone back to where we were. So private consumption expenditure, final consumption expenditure, this is the household consumption expenditure, and in a simpler words is what you and I consume, is still going to be lower than what we were before. And this is the main growth engine of the economy. So demand is going to remain very weak in the economy, and Omicron is obviously going to weaken us. Because why is a problem? Again, think in a larger perspective that it's there are a lot of people who are working in informal sector. You're repeatedly having waves. Every time there's a wave, people you are sitting at home, you're not getting a salary, you're not able to make your ends meet. There's a lot of papers which have been generated which shows that there has been increase in temporary workforce, that is a casual workforce rather than salaried workforce. So when this is happening, how are people going to survive? What they're going to survive is they're going to hold back on consumption, and till we are because they don't know what the future holds for us. I have known now in the last 2 years, I happened to do some field work, and we've discovered that I'm actually doing a pilot study right now on gig workers, and where we are discovering that 50% of people who are in the gig workers who have lost their jobs during COVID wave and 1920 COVID waves, they have to survive, right? They have to eat, they have to feed their families. So it's a matter of survival. Then we find that I heard a story where somebody was telling me that they used to earn 60,000 rupees a month, and because of once he lost his job due to COVID, it was down to 20,000 rupees a month. So can you imagine this kind of huge dent in their expenditure, incomes? And obviously it's going to affect consumption expenditure. The government has spent a lot of money, but the challenge is that, yes, it has lent out, it has given out PDS, but PDS is for people who are already below poverty line. What about the people who were in permanent jobs or salaried jobs who have lost their jobs? What about them? How do we counter for them? Secondly, we find that in-kind transfer like PDS has worked well. Manrega also worked well, at least 2021. But then it hasn't worked well but cash transfers have had varied impact. My colleagues have done research which show that impact is better in rural areas where it is tied to geography. So like PM Pradhan Mantri Kisan, PM Kisan or PDS or Manrega, they work in the rural areas, but we know that it is the urban sector which has borne the brunt of the crisis, and there is no safeguard for them. The new one that has come is e-Shram, but it is still new and there are no policies around it. But again, the challenge is that the below poverty line is, who were affected, they got some impact, some support. But what about people who are regular salaried jobs, maybe not formal, but still salaried jobs, who have now lost their jobs or reduced incomes? What do they do? And that is the policy challenge. It's not surprising that your consumption is low. Government final consumption of expenditure had to go up, not surprising, partly because of they have to make up for what is lost. So the government expenditure has gone up. And it is going to go up 9/21/22. The last one is a last picture that I want to leave you guys with is investment. This is absolutely important because investment actually encourages, feeds into growth, right? What we find is the investment sentiments were very, very low. Again, pre-pandemic, as you can see, it was very low in these quarters, 1920. After 18, 19, 19, 20 were very low, 2021 contracted, then you're supposed to go up. But again, these numbers mean nothing, because when you look at for the first half of the year, it means is that we have still not caught up, but we are projected to catch up by the end of the year. Now, will that happen or not is a $1 million question. In some sectors it may happen, but there's it may happen in the sectors with large firms, but the micro, small and medium enterprises continue to suffer. Now, one area where we have done well is actually the trade sector, where we find that, again, we had a very, we contracted, again, you can see here, 18, 19, 20, 2021, we contracted, we are projected to do well in 21, 22. So this is where we actually continue to do quite well. We have surpassed 1920 levels, and we continue to show robust growth. But the challenges, and here I want to show you this numbers right here, is yes, we are doing quite well, but that is an accompanying challenge. And what is that? That is that there's a widening trade deficit in the country. Now, our current trade deficit in Q2 was already 3% of GDP. Now that widens, what does that mean for us in the future? So that is our external sector. But so, now the question here is really okay. So I'm not trying to paint a very grim picture here, but it coming out as grim is yes, by 21, 22, we were supposed to make up. There's a slim chance that we might not fully catch up, though we might be close, but we might not fully catch up with 1920, but we will still be, we'll be close and we'll make it up. But what does 21, 22 mean? 21, 22 we will grow, right? Now, I'll stop sharing for a minute and then say, okay, we will grow. That's nothing. That is taken because our trade sector is good, our agriculture sector is good, manufacturing sector seems to be recovering well. But I haven't talked about one other key thing: inflation. What is happening to prices? What we find is that inflation rates have diverged. We have two indicators: the CPI retail inflation and the wholesale price index inflation. They both have diverged into two rates. And what the inflation is edging up. Core inflation, which is non-food, non-fuel, has been very sticky at 6%, which is above what the RBI wants to maintain. So what the future holds for us is that we don't know whether there's a new variant. We don't know how deadly it's going to be. Even if it is very deadly, we don't. The second thing is because of supply side challenges, both domestically and internationally, especially internationally, prices may be affected. So inflation is going up. What should the government do? Right now, we haven't talked about monetary and fiscal policy. Should we have a benign monetary policy? But if inflation is supposed to edge up, then does an expansionary monetary policy make sense? Some people have said that fiscal policy now but demand is also quite low. Demand is not going to catch up. Then therefore the government should actually spend. But as Ms. Dr. Negi pointed out, we have been doing supply side measures, but our challenge is also on the demand side. But with inflation going up, if the government spends more, does that mean we are going to have more inflation? Meanwhile, we find that IIP Index of Industrial Production of Capital Goods is actually showing negative Y-on-Y growth in the last 2 months. So we are caught up in trade-offs. What should we do? Should we have an expansionary fiscal policy? Should we are already at 90% of our debt. So should we actually contract fiscal policy? What should we do with our monetary policy? And somebody will say, hey, so how does it matter? I mean, fine, we'll be growing, right? But no, that's the thought that I want to stop with is it doesn't, yes, we may be growing, but at what pace? The pace actually matters because, and here again, this is my last picture, promise. This is my last picture here, and I want to show you that the pace also matters. Why? Now, suppose we have caught up in 21, 22. That's great. But then path 1, this is the green line right here. This shows that if we had grown at 5.8% without any shocks, this is our counterfactual growth part. This is the path we would have grown without any shock. Part 2 is that, we grow we catch up quite up rapidly by 21, 22, and then we grow at 7% thereafter. Part 3 is your, where you grow at say 4.5%. at this thing, and part 4 is you grow at 5.8%. That is what we were before the COVID. Now, if you grow at 7% and more, even then, just and this is where it's very important. Even if you grow at 7% growth rate, it will still take you 10 years to catch up with what we would have been if there had been no COVID. This is what we will only catch up by 29-30 if we grow at 7% and above. So, and if we grow at anything lower, we don't catch up at all. So this is your what you call as a permanent loss in output. Okay, so it is absolutely important that not only its growth is by itself is not enough, that we have to maintain a pace, because if we don't maintain a pace, we will be growing at a very lower pace. And when you look at the forecasts are going from 5.2% or 5.3% to 7.5%. So actually the spread is so high because nobody knows what the next period is going to look like. We have done research where we show that the impact of the policies, the government implemented policies, are quite varied. It's not that it's they depends. So and this, of course, growth by itself, as we know, is not enough. Because the growth will along with growth will come human development. And by the way, this period is also very, very, very important. Why? This period is also very important because it also coincides with our demographic transition, with a peak. So there's a lot of young people in the economy who will need to be employed. And if the economy is not growing fast enough, we are not creating enough jobs, we are not able to absorb them, we are going to be, at the end, we'll have a demographic disaster, because we'll have a lot of old people without any jobs, and we will somehow have to all survive. So on this note, I do want to end. So any reform actually is on a positive note. I want to end that. What we need is close center-state cooperation, and not only that, we need to include our reform priorities should actually focus on the financial sector, health, education, power, and foreign trade. And that's the way. The trade is clearly one place that can help us overcome any growth challenges. On that note, thank you, and sorry for taking so much time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Purnali Bhandari, ma'am. It was really that with your slides and all that, it seems to be uncertain still in the economy from demand side as well as the supply side. And what we have the way out to combat with this kind of situation is still under debate. And you have seen that that the year after year growth rate doesn't matter. We have to see what exactly trend is going on, base effects. And if you are saying that this year the growth is going to be double digit, single digit, but still we need to see we were at the time of 2018-19 or before the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic. And second thing that is most important is if your economy is growing, then we need to see into the dynamics of the growth. As you have seen that, in case of manufacturing or, the industry, growth is coming from where? That need to be understood. That we have seen even within the service sector that most of the people are suffering from. And then maybe some other, the IT sectors and the people who are sitting at the home, they are working more, they are earning more. But people who are working at the ground level, informal sector, just like restaurants and all that, you have pointed out the gig economy, that we need to, even if growth is coming from service sector, from where that is coming, that is what is the dynamics, and then whether this is inclusive or not, all these are the uncertainties in the economy that we need to be very. If you are saying that growth is coming, dynamics understand, and you are all the fascinating is showing that the kind of problem we have in case of measurement as well. What the policy need taken by the government is still whether we should have to go through the contractionary monetary policy, expansionary, or your expansionary policy. That debate is going on. So still where we need to focus that what you have shown in the last that we.
We can't hear you.
Am I audible?
Yeah, now you're audible. Yeah.
Yeah. So just this is a short, not what you have said. Is really we need to look into the dynamics of the growth. Uncertainty here again. If we have some certain numbers of growth rate, we need to see the dynamics of growth. Thank you very much for your interesting and enlightening session, enlightening lecture. Thank you very much. If we have the questions in the chat box, I request all the participants just put your questions in the chat box so we can see it. I will read out on behalf of you. Please put in chat box if you have any question. Yes, one question is there. Good evening, ma'am. Why? This is from Hardik Sharma. Why do you think the divergence is happening between WPI and CPI?
So one thing is that one is the easy answer is it's the construction of the indices. CPI, almost 50% of the weight is placed on food, and then there's fuel and otherwise. So anytime there is food inflation is muted, relatively muted, you will find CPI going down. And that's why it's very important to look at core inflation also. WPI inflation, the emphasis on food is, or the weightage on food is relatively low. So one is construction. The secondly is, this is exactly the point that Dr. Negi was saying in the beginning, that CPI is more demand side. You can say what's the retail inflation, whereas there is a lot of producer side inflation that is coming in. What we find is WPI manufacturing has been very, very high. WPI cotton has been very, very high, partly because of global prices have been very high, have been tightened. So what we find is that it has been this constant demand supply business that is playing out. But global prices have been commodity prices have been quite high. So supply side prices have been high, because suddenly what we find is that as you must be reading the papers, is that suddenly container costs have gone up, because containers they have been piled up of because people were consuming so much, and there was a pile up of containers, and so the ports started being very this thing, or ports are coming in, ships are coming in, but they are going back empty. So there's a traffic jam of ports, as you call it. So so all these prices then add up, and we are seeing also the divergence. Of course, there are base effects too, but during COVID we saw a reverse. The first few months we were seeing that WPI was going down, but CPI was going up. So now we see a reverse. So it's only but even then those periods are also past, and we still see a very high divergence. So the WPI indicates that there are supply side issues. And actually when we talk to our firms, because we do a quarterly survey of firms tell us there are supply side issues too. Logistics continues to be a challenge. So labor is not always coming back. So so all those issues are there, and there's of course the construction issue. Of course, then there is this puzzle is that how you're pricing in. So many people expect and rightly so, that these higher producer prices will now translate into higher consumer prices in the future. This is not the best of producer price index, but this is the sub-proxy that we have to a producer price index, the wholesale price index. So this divergence is coming because of the construction and what the dynamics are, what are playing out on the ground. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. He is writing. So yes, any other questions? Can I see?
Yes. Aditya is asking us, do you think that the immediate post-COVID numbers sustain us over the next couple of years? No, it's not, right? I just showed you. Immediately, the first quarter, you see very high growth rates, but the next quarter, it's not going to, not. When you come, the third quarter numbers are going to release at the end of this month, you will see them that they will not, they will even be lower. That's why it's very important when you cut the data, and this is just to students, I mean, my colleagues of course know, but when you cut the data, it is very important to cut the data, not only look at the growth rates when you have such economic turmoil, such high fluctuations. It's not just important to look at the growth rates, but also look at the levels to understand where you are, where you were and where you are going back. Does that make sense, Aditya? So no, your simple English is a simple answer is no. You're not going to see that.
Okay, and so okay. If I talked in sense of employment, we have seen that initially unemployment rate was very high. Then we have slowly come back to the low unemployment rate. I just wanted to know what in your experience that whatever the employment is generating in the economy, what kind of employment, because earlier we have the unemployment rate was very less. If we see in 2011, 12 or before that, near about 3%. Then suddenly it shoot up before the COVID, near about 6%. And then during the COVID, abnormal situation we have. And again, we, the during the normalcy that we have seen that employment has been generated. Now the question is that what kind of employment, do you have any idea? What kind of employment has been generated so far, showing that unemployment rate is declining? Whether the precarity has been increased. That is something that need to be, again, this will affect your demand side. Consumption is less. Even the people who have the income, they do not want to consume more. So this will have repercussions for further, the growth that we are seeing, the sustainable. So in that sense, what you think, what your observation? Maybe you have research.
I'll take it. Before I answer your question, because this Ananya's question on which sectors of the economy are likely to recover the fastest. So Ananya, quickly, the sectors, as I said, the most likely is the manufacturing sector. The electricity sector was actually quite recovered, and mining sector recovered quite fast. So we expect the industrial sector, which are of these four sectors: construction, manufacturing, electricity, gas and water, and mining. These four sectors should recover the fastest, most quickly, and that's what we see. Because again, there is you can produce, you can make up thing. If I haven't consumed, because if you remember, we were all in a lockdown in 2020. So I did not consume X amount of some good. I can't think of a good, but X amount of good. And so now I'm going to consume more of it. So that kind of, those kind of effects. Or say postpone demand. I was going to buy a washing machine. It's very interesting, these dynamics, because our domestic assistants were not allowed to come in. So what we find is, but a lot of people then spend time in buying washing machines. So what demand for washing machines went up. So you will find some of these dynamics playing out, but this manufacturing is going to recover faster than services. And this is what as I said, I told you about this Baldwin book, which you can look up, and rightly predicts that the manufacturing sector will recover faster than the services sector. And you will even now see, even during the third wave, it is the services sector which gets most affected and takes the most time to recover. Another question, ma'am. Newspapers are talking these days about government plans to revamp SEZs. What should be done and how will it impact inward capital flows? Hardik, I'm not an expert in SEZs. My ex-boss was, and the challenge is that SEZs, and you should read her book, but SEZs has not been particularly successful in India. So it depends, how it all actually boils down to how it is implemented. and whether it affects this thing. What do you mean by when inward capital flows? I assume is foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment may or may not be affected by SEZs. It is affected by a lot of other factors, namely is growth, and also is the ease of doing business factors, the macroeconomic factors, inflation. The fact is regulation in India is very, sorry. So there are a lot of other macro factors that affect it, that affect inward capital flow. So revamping SEZs, this thing. Sorry, Dr. Negi, if there are no more macro questions, now I'll come to the labor markets. Sorry about that. So the labor market questions is very tricky, because what we find is, and this is again because we were all, I was carrying out the business expectation survey quarterly, so to get a sense of how firms were responding to the crisis. My colleague was on ground looking at unemployment and the labor markets for the NCR region, National Capital Region. So my knowledge is derived from that, and from, of course, my own BS surveys or the business expectation survey. So based on that, my reflections are based on that. So if they may or may not be reflected at the CMI data and all others. What we find is, of course, unemployment rate would go up. I mean, I think it's a no-brainer that unemployment rate would go up. What we find is that while unemployment rates then came down as the economy recovered, unemployment rates came down, the important thing is we found that the men recovered much better than the women did. So women did not even come back to the labor market. So there's a gender difference. Okay. There is a second difference that we find is, so there's a huge gender implication for this. The part of the reason is also this actually is the reason is, remember your service sectors, hotel and services, there's a lot of our female driven, a lot of these places employ a lot of females. So if those sectors are not recovering, the impact of the burden would fall on the women. But even within that's one issue, that's a quick gender issue, but there are other issues also, because within in the labor markets are divided and different types. There's permanent workforce, which is a regular salaried workforce. Then there is the non-agricultural sector. There's agriculture sector and non-agriculture sector. Agriculture, in the non-agriculture sector, there is regular salaried workforce, there's casual workforce, and then there are self-employed, which is a huge part of our labor force. What we find is that salaried workers, and this is I find across both the surveys, both my colleague's survey and my survey, it's called the National Data Innovation Center. They publish this data, you can look up on the NCR website. What we find is that regular salaried workers have the share of regular salaried workers actually came down. What from the labor worker side, what we find is that more workers, people have shifted to self-employed because people have to survive. So, they have to switch, or into more casualty workers. Even in our firm surveys also, we find that firms were hiring more temporary workers than as opposed to, say, permanent workers with a contract of more than 1 year. So there is a definite shift in the composition of the workforce. And of course, what the third quarter is actually, as I said, the third quarter, what we find in the high frequency indicators, there was some plateauing of growth. So after the festival time, the demand was over, the season was over, the economy started slowly plateauing, when it coming to a level growth rate. When that happens, so obviously numbers may have come down and may have been affected. I suspect that's what's going on with employment. But we know that as I'm sure as the numbers will tell you, that the fourth quarter will again see an increase in unemployment rate. In January, this should see an increase in unemployment rate. So there are various dimensions to it. And when we had in June 2020, remember we had done the BS, we had asked firms, how will you respond to this kind of a crisis? And they had said their response was very simple. They said, or actually no, we were in March when the national lockdown was announced, and in our firm, we asked firms regularly that what do you do? Will you decrease labor force? We asked them about the sentiments about the labor market. So will you decrease labor force and so on and so forth. What we found in those surveys that firms were saying that in response to the crisis, they would actually, of course, decrease the temporary workers, and for permanent workers, they would implement pay cuts. So that's how they would adjust. So they would not throw away their manager, but they would actually reduce the salary of the manager. So that's when we find out that's how the firms adapted to the crisis as the national lockdown was implemented in 2020. So that's so. But as from the worker side, as you said, of course, you're earning 60,000 a month, and suddenly your salary is under 20,000 a month. You have to survive, and you have to find out alternative employment opportunities. Gig work was a catch-all for them, but the labor markets continue to be very stressed, because ultimately a lot of people say they want to go back to their own job, previous job, because that's their best skills are used there. So there is a lot of challenges there in terms of that. So I don't know whether I answered all your questions, but unemployment rate, and if you remember, if you know the computation of the unemployment rate, it is the number of people who are actively looking for a job. If the number of people who are actively looking for a job stop looking, which means is then your numerator is actually going up, so your proportion will be actually be lower. Sorry, it's going down, so the number of your proportion will actually be lower. So the idea, so if there are people who are leaving the labor market and do not come back, then also your unemployment rate will go down. So what we find is labor force, so along with unemployment rates, one should look at labor force participation rates also. And again, one group that has been affected is the youth. The youth labor market, and even youth unemployment rates tend to be higher, and then they have even increased much more because they are not able to find jobs to sustain themselves. So those are the challenges that we find. But either way, overall macro picture for the workforce is grim.
Thank you, ma'am. I think we don't have much questions now. So thank you very much for patiently answering all the questions and giving such an enlightening session. I would like to request our teacher in charge, Ms. Richa Suri Rastogi, please propose a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Negi. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. It is my immense privilege to propose a formal vote of thanks for today's session. First and foremost, I extend my sincere gratitude towards Dr. Barnali Bhandari for sparing her precious time. Ma'am, your detailed presentation and discussion on the way Indian economy is performing and is expected to perform in this pandemic time has given a deep insight to all of us on this subject. Thank you also for such patiently answering all our questions. Sincere thanks to our principal, sir, Professor Gyantosh Kumar Jha, who's always been a guiding force for all our endeavors. I also extend a deep sense of appreciation to Dr. Vinita Tulli, Internal Quality Assurance Cell convener and our webinar committee convener. Under her guidance, IQAC has successfully conducted over 100 webinars during these tough times. I extend my thanks to Dr. Balkishan Negi to have successfully organized and perfect coordination of today's session. Dr. Balkishan Negi is our Economics Department seminar convener, and I really appreciate all the efforts he's put for organizing this session. My thanks to the student team who behind the scenes have worked with Dr. Negi for organizing this event. A big thanks to the technical team, especially Mr. Ravinder Pant for his technical support provided to us for today's event. Alas, my thanks to all the participants for patient hearing and active participation in today's webinar. Thank you all of you. Thank you, ma'am, for sparing your precious time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Barnali ma'am, once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you once again for inviting me. It was a good pleasure. Thank you.